My father worked the line at Hargrove Paper Mill in Cascade Falls, Wisconsin for 31 years. He wore the same steel-toed boots every single day, resoled twice. He brought his lunch in a black thermos and a paper bag, and he never once complained about the smell that came home with him in his clothes. He died on a Tuesday in November, 4 days after his 63rd birthday, a small stroke while he was making coffee. By the time the ambulance came, it was already over. I drove up from Chicago the same afternoon my uncle called. My brother flew in from Portland the next morning. The three of us stood in my father's kitchen and didn't say much. The coffee was still in the pot, half full. Neither of us wanted to touch it. The funeral was on a Friday. 18 people came, maybe 20. A few guys from the mill who had already retired, a neighbor who brought a casserole, my father's old union rep who shook my hand with both of his and said my father was the most reliable man he had ever known. I didn't know what to do with that. I just said thank you and moved on down the line. At the graveside, it was just the three of us and the pastor. The ground was frozen at the edges and the sky was the color of old concrete. My brother stood with his hands in his coat pockets. I stood next to him and tried to remember if I had eaten anything that day. The pastor finished. We stood there for another minute. I wasn't ready to leave, but I didn't know why. There was nothing else to wait for. That was when the woman walked up. She was older, maybe late 60s, in a dark coat with a wool scarf. She moved carefully across the frozen grass like she had been here before and knew where to step. She wasn't anyone I recognized. She hadn't been at the service. She stopped a few feet from me and looked at my father's name on the marker, and then she looked at me. "You're his daughter," she said. It wasn't a question. I told her I was. She reached into her coat pocket and took out a card. Plain white, no logo. She held it out and I took it. There was a name on it, Owen Marsh Estate Planning, and a phone number with a Milwaukee area code. "Your father asked me to be here today," she said. "He wanted to make sure this reached you directly." I looked at the card and then back at her. "Who are you?" "A friend," she said. "From a long time ago. Call that number, Monday morning first thing. Tell them Everett's daughter is ready." Then she turned and walked back the way she had come, slow and careful across the frozen ground, and got into a car at the edge of the cemetery road. I watched the car until it was gone. My brother was looking at me. "Who was that?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. I held the car the whole drive back to my father's house. I put it on the kitchen counter and looked at it while we heated up the casserole and ate standing up without talking much. My brother picked it up once, turned it over, set it back down. "Probably nothing," he said. I didn't say anything, but I didn't throw it away. My father was not a man who talked about money. That was the straightest truth I could give you. He paid his bills on time, and he kept a savings account at the same credit union he had joined when he was 22 years old, and he drove used cars until they stopped working. He did not have investments. He did not have a financial advisor. He had a thermos and a paper bag and 31 years on the line at Hargrove. When he retired, 3 years before he died, there was no party. He came home, changed out of his work clothes, and mowed the backyard even though it didn't really need it. I thought I knew exactly what his estate was going to look like. The house, which he owned outright, a modest savings account, a small pension from the mill, his truck, the tools in the garage which were worth more to him than anything else he owned. I had already started thinking through what a basic probate would look like. I was not expecting surprises. I called the Milwaukee number Monday morning from my father's kitchen. I hadn't gone back to Chicago yet. I don't know exactly why. I told myself it was to deal with the house, but really I think I just wasn't ready to be in my apartment alone with all of it. A woman answered on the second ring. I told her my name and that my father was Everett Cole. There was a brief pause on the line. "We've been expecting your call," she said. "Mr. Marsh can see you Wednesday at 10. Can you come to Milwaukee?" I said I could. I didn't tell my brother about the appointment right away. I don't know exactly why. Maybe I thought it would turn out to be nothing and I didn't want to start something. Maybe I just needed to go alone first and understand what I was walking into before I tried to explain it to anyone else. The office was in Milwaukee, in a building near the Third Ward. The kind of building with a directory in the lobby and a slow elevator and potted plants that looked like they had been there since the 1990s. Suite 408. The nameplate beside the door said Marsh and Associates, Estate Planning and Trust Services. Owen Marsh was in his mid-70s. White hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a cardigan under his jacket. He stood when I came in and shook my hand, and then pointed to the chair across from his desk and waited until I was settled before he sat back down. "I'm sorry about your father," he said. "He was a good man. I knew him for a long time." I told him I didn't know they knew each other. "That was how he wanted it," Owen said. He opened a folder on his desk and put on his glasses and looked at it for a moment. "Your father first came to see me in 2003. 21 years ago, he had just paid off the house and he wanted to think about what came next. Not for himself, for other people." I waited. "Are you familiar with a thing called a donor-advised fund?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. He explained it to me in plain language. A donor-advised fund is a charitable giving account. You put money into it, you get a tax deduction, and then you recommend grants from that account to charitable organizations over time. The money grows in the meantime, invested, and you direct where it goes according to your own priorities and your own schedule. Your father opened one in 2003 with $20,000, Owen said. He contributed to it every year after that. Never a large amount at once. 2,000 here, 5,000 there, whatever the year allowed. He lived carefully on purpose. The contributions came first. I looked at him across the desk. I was trying to hold very still. "What he built," Owen continued, "is a fund with a current value of approximately $340,000. Over the course of 20 years, he has directed grants totaling roughly $210,000 to 11 different organizations in the state of Wisconsin. Food pantries, a rural health clinic in Ashland County, 2 scholarship programs at community colleges, a domestic violence shelter in Warsaw." The room was quiet. I could hear the elevator somewhere down the hall. "He funded 3 full scholarships," Owen said. "2 of those students have already graduated. One is in her second year." I didn't say anything. I couldn't find the words in the right order. Owen reached across the desk and pushed a piece of paper toward me. It was a summary sheet, a list of organizations with amounts next to each one and dates. I looked at the names of the places. I recognized the food pantry. My father had volunteered there twice a year for as long as I could remember. I thought he was just helping pack boxes. "He never told anyone," I said finally. "No one?" Owen said. "That was his firm instruction. He didn't want recognition. He wasn't building a legacy with his name on it. He was just doing what he believed a person should do with whatever extra they had." I looked back down at the list. $210,000 from a man who resold the same boots twice. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked. My voice came out smaller than I expected. Owen took off his glasses and set them on the desk. "He said he didn't want it to change the way you saw him. He wanted you to know him as your father, not as a donor, not as someone who expected gratitude," he said. Owen paused, like he was choosing his words carefully. He said he'd spent his whole life watching people get recognized for doing a fraction of what they should have done all along. He didn't want any part of that. I pressed my hands flat on my knees and looked at the ceiling for a second. "He also left a letter," Owen said, "for you specifically." He took an envelope from the folder and slid it across the desk. My name was on the front in my father's handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed my report cards, the same handwriting on every birthday card I had ever gotten from him, with $10 tucked inside. I didn't open it right then. I put it in my coat pocket and I thanked Owen and I shook his hand again and I walked back down to the lobby and sat on a bench near the potted plants for a long time before I could make myself stand up and go back outside. There is a particular kind of cold in Milwaukee in November that is different from Chicago cold. Chicago cold is loud. It comes off the lake with something to prove. Milwaukee cold is quiet. It just settles in and stays. I sat in my car in the parking structure for a while. I didn't drive anywhere. I just sat with the heater running and thought about my father making coffee by himself every morning in that kitchen and carrying his lunch to a job that wore him down physically for 31 years and still finding a way to send $2,000 a year toward people he would never meet. I thought about the food pantry. I had gone with him once, maybe 10 years ago, when I was back for Thanksgiving and he talked me into going Saturday morning. We packed bags for 3 hours. He knew everyone there, the other volunteers, the coordinator, a couple of the regular clients. He remembered names. He asked after people's families. On the drive home, he said, "It's the most useful thing I do all week." I thought he just meant it felt good to help. I didn't understand that he meant it literally. I took the letter out of my pocket and opened it. It was 2 pages in his handwriting, which was neat and even, the handwriting of a man who had filled out mill paperwork for 3 decades. He said he knew I would have questions, and he was sorry he wasn't there to answer them in person. He said the fund was set up so that it could continue after him, directed by whoever he designated, and that he was designating me. He said I didn't have to continue it exactly as he had. I could redirect it or restructure it or wind it down over time if I decided that was right. But he asked me to think carefully first. He had a list, he said, in the top left drawer of his desk in a green folder. Organizations he had been watching, causes he thought were underfunded, places where a small amount of money would go a long way. He asked me to look at the list before I made any decisions. He said he was proud of me. He said he knew I would figure it out. He signed it, Dad. Not Everett, not your father, just Dad. I drove back to Cascade Falls that afternoon instead of going to Chicago. My brother called me at 6 while I was sitting in my father's living room with the green folder open on my lap. I told him I needed to talk to him about something, and I told him where I was. He drove up the next morning. I made coffee in the same pot because at some point you have to, and we sat at the kitchen table and I showed him everything, the summary sheet, the letter, the green folder. He was quiet for a long time. He never said anything, my brother said finally. No. He picked up the summary sheet and looked at the list again. He was at the part about the scholarships. 3 kids went to college because of him. 2 graduated, I said. 1 is still in school. He set the paper down and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. The grass was dead and brown, and the old push mower was still parked against the fence where my father always left it. He was always telling me to save more, my brother said. His voice had changed a little. Every time money came up, he'd say, "Live on less than you make. Save the difference. Give some of it away." I thought he was just being old-fashioned. He wasn't, I said. My brother rubbed the back of his neck. "What are you going to do with the fund?" "Keep it going," I said. I hadn't known that for certain until I said it out loud. But once I did, it's settled. I'm going to keep contributing to the organizations he already supported, and I'm going to look at the list in the green folder and figure out where else it makes sense. He nodded slowly. "Can I be involved?" I looked at him across the table. He looked like he had when we were kids, and he was asking if he could come along somewhere, trying to seem casual about it so that I wouldn't say no. "Yeah," I said. "I think Dad would have wanted that." There was a moment, about a week later, when it all almost came undone. My father had a sister, my aunt, who lived in Green Bay. She had never been close with my father. There was an old falling out that nobody ever fully explained to me, something from when they were young that had calcified over the years into a general distant politeness at holidays. She had been at the funeral, but we hadn't talked much. She called me on a Saturday. She had heard, through some chain of family communication I couldn't fully trace, that there was more to my father's estate than a house and a pension. I don't know exactly what she heard or who told her. She was not warm on the phone. She said she felt that as a family member she was entitled to understand the full picture of her brother's finances. She used the word entitled twice. She said that whatever my father had accumulated should be considered in light of family relationships and family obligations. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I said, What my father chose to do with his money was his decision entirely. He built it, he directed it, and he documented his intentions clearly. The fund is designated for charitable purposes. That's what it has always been, and that's what it's going to stay. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "You always were just like him." I said, "Thank you." She hung up. I called my brother after and told him what happened. He laughed for the first time since the funeral. Owen Marsh walked me through the process of formally assuming the advisory role over the next several weeks. There was paperwork. There was a meeting with the fund administrator at the investment firm. There were forms that needed my signature and a conversation about grant-making strategy and record-keeping. At one point, Owen looked up from a document and said, "You know, your father asked me once whether he thought it mattered. The small amounts, the slow pace, the fact that it would never be his name on a building anywhere. He seemed genuinely uncertain." "What did you tell him?" I asked. I told him the food pantry had never missed a month of operation in the last 15 years, and that one of the reasons for that was his annual contribution. I told him one of the scholarship recipients had already become a nurse and was working in a rural clinic in northern Wisconsin. He paused. He seemed satisfied with that. I thought about my father driving up to Green Bay for the holidays and making polite conversation with people he had drifted from and coming home and sitting in his kitchen and not saying anything about any of it. I thought about him packing bags at the food pantry and knowing that the place stayed open in part because of what he put in every year and never once saying so. He was satisfied with very little, I said. "That's not quite right," Owen said. He took his glasses off and held them in his hand. "I think he was satisfied with the right things. Those are different." The green folder had 14 organizations on it. Notes in the margins in my father's handwriting, why he was watching them, what gap he thought they filled, what he would have wanted to know before committing money. One of them was a summer literacy program in Milwaukee for kids who lost ground in reading over the summer months. My father had written next to it, "Costs less per kid than a week of cable. Gap is enormous. Nobody paying attention." Another was a respite care program for family caregivers of people with dementia. He had written, "These people are invisible. They work harder than anyone, and they have no support system, and no one is talking about it." I sat with the folder for a long time. I read each entry more than once. It was like hearing him think. He had never been a talkative man, not cold, just contained. And reading the notes was like finding a room in a house I thought I knew that had been there all along. I added both organizations to the giving plan for the following year. It is March now, almost 4 months since the funeral. I drove up to Cascade Falls last weekend to handle a few more things at the house. We are not selling it yet. My brother and I keep going back and forth on it, and we keep landing in the same place, which is that we're not ready, and that seems like enough of a reason for now. I went to the food pantry on Saturday morning. I told the coordinator who I was, and she stopped what she was doing and looked at me for a moment like she was recalibrating something. "Your father," she said. She didn't finish the sentence right away. "He was here for 15 years, every spring and every fall, regular as anything. He never missed. We used to count on him." She paused. "We didn't know about the other part. He never mentioned it." "That was how he wanted it," I said. She nodded like that made complete sense to her. "He brought donuts sometimes," she said. "On the morning shifts. Just showed up with a box and set it on the table and didn't say anything about it." I helped pack boxes for 3 hours. I knew where they kept the tape. I knew which shelves held what. I knew because I had been there before, once, years ago, when I was too distracted by my own life to pay close attention. I paid attention this time. On the drive back to the house, I thought about what Owen had said about being satisfied with the right things. I thought about my father in this same drive, in his truck, after a Saturday morning at the pantry, and what he was thinking, whether he felt what I felt, which was something quieter than pride but more durable, something that didn't need a name. I think he did. I think that was the whole point. The green folder is on my desk at home now, next to my laptop. I've added some notes of my own in the margins. My handwriting is different from his, looser, less disciplined, But the questions are the same ones he was asking. What is actually needed? Where does the money go furthest? Who is doing the work that nobody is watching? I look at the folder most mornings before I start my day. My father worked the line for 31 years and wore the same boots and brought his lunch in a paper bag, and nobody at that mill knew what he was doing with the money he saved by living small. He didn't need them to know. He didn't need anyone to know. He left me the structure. He trusted me to learn the rest. I'm learning. I keep thinking about the boots. My father resoled the same pair twice. Not because he couldn't afford new ones, I understand that now, but because replacing something that still worked felt wrong to him. Every dollar that didn't go towards something unnecessary was a dollar that could go somewhere it actually mattered. That was the logic he lived by for 31 years quietly without explaining it to anyone. What he built wasn't an accident. It was the result of 1,000 small decisions made in the same direction over and over for 2 decades. He chose to live on less. He chose to give before he spent. He chose to keep it private, not out of secrecy, but out of a genuine belief that the giving only counted if it wasn't about him. That kind of consistency, the kind nobody sees and nobody applauds, is harder than most people realize. It requires something steady at the center that doesn't depend on recognition to keep going. I think about the cause and the effect of it. The food pantry stayed open every month for 15 years, in part because of his annual check. A young woman in northern Wisconsin became a nurse and is now working in a rural clinic where people have very few options. She doesn't know his name. She may never know his name. But the thread from his decision to her career is real, even if it's invisible. That's how it works most of the time. The consequences of what we do or don't do ripple out in directions we can't trace and won't live to see. He understood that. He bet on it anyway. What I didn't expect was what it would ask of me. Not the paperwork, not the fund administration. Those things are manageable. What it asked of me was to be honest about how I had been paying attention or not paying attention to the things that mattered most. I had gone to the food pantry once and spent 3 hours thinking mostly about my drive home. I had taken his live on less, save the difference, give some away, as an old fashioned saying rather than an actual instruction. I had known him my whole life and understood him only partially. The green folder on my desk is a kind of education, reading his notes. Gap is enormous, nobody paying attention. These people are invisible. I keep recognizing a way of thinking I had filed under. That's just how he was, without understanding that it was a practice, a discipline, something he had built deliberately over time. You don't arrive at that kind of clarity without doing the work of actually looking at the world and asking hard questions about where the need is and where the help isn't going. That's what I'm trying to learn, not just to give, but to look carefully enough to know where it matters, to be consistent enough that the small amounts add up to something real, to care enough about the outcome that I don't need my name attached to it. My father figured all of that out on a mill worker's salary with a thermos and a paper bag. He didn't wait until he had more. He started with what he had and kept going. I'm starting with what I have. I'm keeping going.